Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fifth and final episode of Season 1 of the Let's Talk Weekly podcast. Once again, my name is David Fitz. I'm your host. This has been a short season, and I realized that most shows have longer seasons, more than just 5 episodes. But with this show just still getting off the ground, I want to take a short hiatus to focus on revamping some things and focus on getting Season 2 in order so it can come back bigger and better and more surprises. Now, in this episode of the Let's Talk Weekly podcast, I am joined by my good friend Larry Flanoy, and we discussed what it means to be a Whovian. And if you don't know what that means, that is to be a fan of the legendary show Doctor Who, which is a British television show which has been around since the 1960s. Next year will be the 50th anniversary, and tomorrow night, September 1st, 2012, is the Season 7 premiere, which will be airing at 9 p.m. on BBC America, and the episode title, Asylum of the Daleks. There's a lot that we discussed, different companions, the Doctor, hero versus villain, the points of views that people may take with the show. And, it's just a lot of things out there, being a fan, a casual fan, where did we start, where did we get on the TARDIS, which is time and relative dimension in space. That is his time-traveling spaceship. With further ado, I welcome you all to the season finale of the Let's Talk Weekly podcast, and I hope you all enjoy. And in the words of the 10th Doctor, Allon-Y, which means let's go in French. And since we're about to embark on the journey, I thought it would be proper if I were to introduce you to the TARDIS in all her glory. With the brakes on, I must add. Live now. Cool.
Awesome.
So Doctor Who. When did you come into it?
Well, when it came to Doctor Who, it was really this random kind of thing. I mean, people talk about it and all of that, and ever since they started the series and everything, I had people talking about it, and I had a friend describe it to me, and I was like, well, that sounds stupid. So I never watched it. And then I didn't start watching it until I got Netflix and everything. And then, that's when I kind of gave it a shot when I started to recognize some of the actors and everything from movies and things that I had seen before. And I was like, okay, well, let me see what all the fuss is about. And then I watched it, and I still didn't like it, but it kind of grew on me, and then I started to like it a whole lot. So, it's pretty, it's been pretty cool.
So, did you come into it with, David Tennant, Christopher Eccleston?
Yeah, I started it on the very first Christopher Eccleston episode when him and Rose meet.
Okay, and I know you said that you saw some actors that you knew. Who were some of the actors that you knew from other movies and shows?
Christopher Eccleston. I had actually seen a movie or two with him in it. I know he's actually the villain in this movie called The Seeker that came out a few years ago in America. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I think it was based in the UK or something though. But it came out over here in theaters, and we have it on DVD. And Christopher Upton plays like the evil villain or whatever. He's trying to like take over the world. He was pretty cool in that movie. So you know, I was like, oh, he's playing the Doctor. You know, let me see. You know, what's that going to be like?
So his acting style, can you tell like the difference between his acting style playing a villain versus playing a hero?
Yeah, because you know, him being very humorous and stuff like that, it's pretty interesting compared to like, you know, how I saw him in that movie. He was like this really diabolical villain, really evil, you know, ruthless kind of guy in that one. And I mean, it was like a kid's movie and everything, but you know, in this one, like, I kind of saw like a whole different character out of him, which was pretty surprising. And you know, I did kind of grow to like him as the Doctor. You know, unfortunately, he didn't stay too long, but I thought he was pretty cool while he lasted.
Yeah, I think first that movie, The Seeker, I think it was based off of a book. I think it might be the same name, but I do agree that I think I would have liked to have seen him like stay around for maybe like another season or two, just to see how the story would have progressed with him.
Yeah.
But I do realize with the role of the Doctor as the person who always does regenerate, I think seeing him switch over to David Tennant was interesting, was especially like right after he came out of the regeneration, he went right to the conversation like, okay, so where was I a moment ago?
Yeah.
So it's
and
like
it seemed like he knew more about himself at the beginning of that regeneration than like Matt Smith did, or at least that's what it kind of seemed like.
yeah, because I remember when Matt Smith came out after regeneration, he's like, oh, I don't have ginger hair. He's like, my hair is long. Am I a girl? No, I'm a guy. Okay, cool. and I like the whole play that we saw from the audience standpoint of like, okay, it's a new guy. He's figuring out who he is. Okay, he remembers the same stuff. He's like, how do I look now? And you know, on the flip side, I did hear this on another podcast, I think, or it could have been an article somewhere that said, like, okay, like the character James Bond, you get a new James Bond, we turn our head and cough and look the other way, but the Doctor will like, oh wait, hold on, who's this new guy? Is he gonna play it right? Okay, cool. All right, he's cool.
Well, I mean, to be fair, I did kind of think the same thing with James Bond. I was like, Daniel Craig. I was like, who is this guy? And, you know, once I saw a picture of him, I was like, you know, he looks like a villain. He doesn't look like a hero. He doesn't look like James Bond. He looks like the kind of guy that James Bond would fight, like some kind of like evil Russian guy or something. And, you know, I actually just recently saw the new James Bond movies. I always missed the opportunity to watch them, you know, in the past. So I finally got a hold of them recently, and I watched them, you know, back to back. Because I saw the trailer for Skyfall in theaters, and I was just like, that was crazy. I got to find out what's going on leading up to this.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance to see the second one. I know I saw the first one with Daniel Craig when it came out. I don't remember what year that was. It seemed like it was like maybe like 2-3 years ago, maybe.
That was about 2006.
Okay, yeah, I'm off. Okay, that's right, I am off.
Yeah, that was about 2006. Because Quantum of Solace came out like 2008, 2009. So, you know, I mean, James Bond kind of, you know, got its, you know, reboot, kind of, you know, restart kind of thing around the same time as Doctor Who. You know, it's kind of interesting.
That's true.
Both very big, you know, icon, you know, overseas. So.
That's true. Like when you look at like James Bond compared to Doctor Who, like the role of, I guess if we talk about Doctor Who, the companions, and you look at James Bond's companions, they're pretty much the same actors.
Mm-hmm.
and I forget some of the character roles, but I mean the character names. So it's like it's the same people, and then they don't look at him as like you changed your face. They don't do that. I mean they just look at him as your Agent 007.
Yeah.
So it's
I mean, well, the people that he kind of meets up with and things, they don't particularly, know each other or anything like that.
that's the only person I was thinking of was like John Cleese's character, and then Agent Q, I believe is her name.
Yeah.
I forgot the actress name. I know her face. I just can't think of her name. But you look at like on Doctor Who companions. You remember when the episode the Christmas Invasion, right after David Tennant came out of Regeneration, Jackie's like, "Who's he?" Rose is like, "It's a doctor." And Jackie's like, "He looks different." And it was that's and even the episode in season 5 when Amy and the Doctor go to World War II, Winston Churchill says, "You changed your face, I see,"
Mm-hmm.
but he knows it's the Doctor.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
No,
Like, that's one thing that I do like about the newest season is that they're going back to what Doctor Who did when it first started in the 60s, is that it had actually started with the Doctor doing, things where he went back in time to different parts of history, and it actually was like kind of a backdoor way for kids to like learn about history and things like that, but they didn't want to kind of get caught up in, historical this and that, so they started to introduce, other planets and things like that later,
mm-hmm.
which was, pretty interesting to find out. But in the 50s season especially, we started to see, a lot more things kind of show up from, not just, British history or anything like that. History all together. We got, Winston Churchill, Hitler, Vincent van Gogh, all these different, people that, have been showing up. I think in the 7th season, they're talking about having like an Egyptian queen or something like that. I don't know if it's going to be fictional or not, but, there's supposed to be like an Egyptian queen in like an episode or two. Yeah, so, I'm looking forward to seeing, what they're going to keep, if they're going to keep, playing on that.
I am too. I mean, I think you said like the Egyptian queen. I remember like toward the end of season 5 when the Doctor gets the call that Cleopatra wants to see him. He's like, okay, and then it happens to be River Song impersonating her.
Yeah.
Just to get his attention, but it kind of does. I wonder if they'll go back to that whole he knows Cleopatra. Maybe it could be somebody else.
Yeah, exactly.
Because
but that's pretty cool. How they've kept things from like the earlier seasons in while still kind of making this Doctor a little bit more of his own story. He doesn't have as many friends as David Tennant and.
no, he doesn't. I mean, he has his friend Craig, the lodger. I mean, he had his 2 episodes.
Yeah, I love that guy. I think he's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hope he
I
comes
really
back.
hope he shows up again at least one or 2 more times. I think he needs to have an episode every season.
Yeah, he does because like he's one of those people where it's like he's that person who doesn't know a lot about what's going on, but he sees a Doctor and he's like, okay, what's going on in space?
Yeah, he's like, there's something weird about to happen because you're here.
Right, especially when he shows up again and it turns out to be the Cyberman.
Yeah, he instantly knows. He's like, there's no reason for you to be here unless something is going on.
And that's the one thing you have to give one thing the writers credit is that they in like Stephen Moffat and his crew, even Russell T Davies when he had the reign of Doctor Who, is this like they made the humans or the characters we didn't see much as like the random humans walking around. They weren't so dumb, mystified people. They were smart, and I'm glad they wrote them to be smart because
Yeah.
we are smart people.
Oh yeah, that, and then the fact that they actually introduced a while ago the fact that the Doctor doesn't like talking to people unless he feels like they're smart.
That's true. He did. It did say that.
He doesn't like stupid questions. Like if you look at the episode when he meets Martha and the girl that Martha's with, they're both doctors or whatever, but training to be doctors, and I think she said something silly, and then the doctor just starts treating her like real bad like the whole time. Like after that,
When Martha first saw him, like he gave her his necktie.
yeah.
And then the end of it, I think did he have it on or did he take it from her? I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember. I have to go back and watch that one again. It's been a while.
Because that was one of those ones that played on the whole concept of space of time travel.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I mean that. But you're right. Like, he does do the he wants to be around smart people. I mean, like let's take the character of Mickey. I mean, Mickey was pretty smart, but the Doctor didn't really shine to him until later.
Yeah, because he had to kind of show himself, that he could hold his own alongside all of these professors and, warriors and pirates and, scientists that, the Doctor dealt with, on a normal basis. He's like, the mechanic,
Yeah, I mean, and I think it could have been like, okay, I wonder if the Doctor probably looked at him like, you're just this regular, you're this regular Joe. But Mickey did he did prove himself to be worthy toward later on, especially when they had all the companions together and they battled Davros. Sorry, because before a while he used to always call him Ricky. He was like no, my name is Mickey. I mean, even like Rose, I think when the first episode. Season 1 is called Rose, so it's like, okay, she's gonna be the companion. And it's like, I mean, she didn't really seem to be like scared of anything. She was just kind of like, okay, this is what's going on. Okay, I'll go.
Yeah, and I think that might have been a thing that kind of, interested, him about her. Is that, he's like, I'm the Doctor, like, when I talk about things, people should be, really, either really interested or, really, turned away, and she was more like, this is interesting. I don't particularly believe him, but, I want to find out more, I guess. Because at first he's like, well, I don't really want to be part of this girl. But then, as she gets pulled into, the situation that he's dealing with, and then eventually, she does start to kind of prove herself useful, later throughout the episode. He's like, this is probably somebody that, would be kind of cool to hang out with,
Right, because when she came along, he was. I mean, I don't know how many years it had been. Since the Time War had been time locked, but he was still in that kind of that somewhat warrior mode.
Exactly, and then meeting with this young girl, who really just is trying to live life, kind of, and you accidentally pull her into this extraordinary situation that is nothing like anything she's ever dealt with before,
Right, because.
Now you change her life forever because now she has, all of this stuff that, she's never seen before happening in the course of one episode.
Right, because you had the plastic men. I mean, I think any person that would see, okay, these mannequins, they start moving and walking, that would freak somebody out.
Oh, definitely.
And especially when they realize, oh, there are guns in their hands. Yeah, okay. But Rose didn't really freak out. She's like, okay, I'm gonna keep myself safe, but I'm gonna help the doctor out because he needs my help.
Yeah, and she was like kind of selfless, at least in that aspect, when it came to the doctor. You know, willing to do anything, you know, kind of save him. You know, even if it was reckless. You know, and then that was kind of like, I guess, the thing between her and Martha. I felt like was that to me it felt more like Martha didn't do things that were reckless or calculated. You know,
Right.
she did things to help the doctor, and she would do anything to help the doctor. But it seems like she was really good on her feet. Like she was like, okay, I know exactly what to do. You know, I see all of this going on. You know, but then, you know, there were situations where she did get put in a situation where it's like, okay, I can't get out of it, you know? And that's where the vulnerability kind of came out with Martha. It's like, you know, I'm in trouble now. You know, I know exactly when I'm in trouble, you know, right now. And, you know, unfortunately, it always seemed like she was pretty much done for before the doctor would save her.
Yeah, that was unfortunate about Martha, but he liked her. I mean, there's some part of me that thinks maybe he did like her a little bit more than Rose, but because of what happened to Rose, he couldn't shake it.
Yeah, because I'm like, you put her in like another dimension, like.
Yeah, because
Rose is in another dimension now.
right, and you know, especially when the bubble in space is about to close, and you think he's about to tell her, "I love you,"
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, and maybe he was going to say, "I love you," but we never know what he was going to say.
Yeah.
It was just like it was.
That was really weird.
And I guess, you know, at that point we think we'll never see her again ever.
Uh,
But yeah, I think Martha. I mean, he met Donna before he met Martha.
yeah.
I mean, Donna was. I think Donna is kind of probably weirded him out, sort of. I'm guessing.
Yeah, but they definitely, I felt like they definitely had like the closest, you know, relationship as far as like friendship out of the first three families.
I do
They
too.
definitely had that really close, strong bond. Like, they both were very quirky, and they both, and I felt like they kind of understood each other in that aspect, you know?
That's true. That they did. I mean, I think I think if you look at it in this light of Rose is his first person he meets after the Time War, and then she starts to kind of calm him down to look at things from her point of view. She goes, he's regenerated. David Tennant's doctor is a little more like open up to things because of Rose. Martha comes along, and she kind of grounds him even more. And I think for a while, she probably was his equal because of her doctor status, especially when she shows back up during Donna's season working for Unit. It's more like, okay, she kind of took over the role of the militant doctor.
Yeah.
And I guess you could say in one aspect, this is probably how he was when he first showed up.
And not only that, but it kind of seems like, you know, with his companions, he imparts like a little bit of himself in them in a way. And they almost start to become, you know, versions of him.
That's true.
You know, just from being, you know, around for so long and dealing with the things that they've dealt with together.
Even Captain Jack Harkness too.
Mm-hmm.
And even him, like, I mean, when you first meet him, I mean, he was, wasn't he on the run basically?
Yeah, he was.
Oh, then But then later on, like because of his time with the Doctor, he became more like, okay, I gotta do things better with my life.
Yeah, and started to kind of add structure to, what was going on and what he was dealing with to, kind of make his life a little bit better.
That's true.
Make it work out a little bit better. Because like when he comes back, it's been like a pretty significant change in like who he was at the beginning to who he was then.
Right, because I think the Doctor was like, okay, I can trust you, but I'm gonna hold you on a short leash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he was kind of like that, firecracker, loose cannon kind of guy.
Yeah, but when you think about it, he did get things done.
Exactly.
I mean, in his own way. I mean, he did get stuff done, especially when he died, and then Rose brings him back a few minutes later. It's like, okay, we see how Jack can be, and we like him, and he's. Cause I think at first, the writers wanted you to hate Jack.
Yeah, I believe they said that they weren't gonna, even have him,
Yeah, they did say that.
After that, he was just gonna be there for, a couple episodes, and that was it. But, he ended up actually being pretty popular. And then, he ends up not only, coming back, but then, being, a main character of his own show,
Right.
And, which is pretty awesome, that kind of happened. Doctor Who started to build its own universe off of the revived series, because you had, the Torchwood, and you had, the Sarah Jane Adventures, and, K9 and Company, and all of these things that kind of started, building off of most of these off of just like one or two seasons of the revived series.
That's right.
And, becoming really, really popular in their own right, which is a big testament to what this series has been able to do as opposed to the, the older series. Because if you look at, Doctor Who, went on for about 26 seasons for a series, before it, unfortunately got canceled in '89. But, there's definitely a ton of people that loved it, and, it definitely built a huge, huge following. But, it wasn't enough to, keep it going, for that 16 or so years that it was off the air, and, they tried to revive it in '96 with that, with that made-for-TV movie, but that didn't work out. And then, they did have like a spinoff, I think, in the early '80s, where it was like a pilot. I think that one actually was the K9 again, and it didn't work out. And so it's like, I don't know what happened, but with this new series, it's almost as if, everything that they were trying to do, 50 years ago is now accepted at this point. The sonic screwdriver being, more important than it ever was in the old series. All of the, people who, kind of crossed over from the old series to the new series while, unfortunately, the characters of Sarah Jane Smith and the Brigadier General, unfortunately they both passed, but, before that, they even had, 5 side roles, in the show themselves, and then, Sarah Jane having her own series, of course, with her kids and all of that. So, this one has definitely been very successful, in the short years that it's been on.
And I think one thing that has to add to the success is social media, Facebook, Twitter, DVD sales, internet, even Nielsen ratings.
Yeah, because, Doctor Who for the internet generation has definitely been very successful and very interesting for, how this one has grown compared to older, because when it came to Doctor Who, I'm pretty sure it was really hard to watch it, especially if you live here,
Right.
And now it's like a whole different generation of, people, who can watch it on a normal basis. And then, we have like BBC America and all of that. So, we can watch it. We can even watch it on regular television now, as opposed to having to try to find like tapes or, DVDs or, go on the internet. We can actually watch it on television, now. I don't know if that was possible back then. America, but, we have that ability.
But I think in the 80s, I heard that it was on PBS. Like, I know they were showing episodes from the Fourth Doctor of Tom Baker.
Okay.
So, and they were all black and white episodes, and that's how people watched them here. But then they stopped showing it on PBS. I don't know when, but it was that blackout period. I mean, then they had that movie in 1996, and then I think after that it was like on that long hiatus until 2005.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one thing I do give the BBC a lot of credit for is sticking to a show that has had a very large following. And yeah, there was a gap, but they brought it back, and next year is going to be the 50th anniversary.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would be nice. I mean, I know that it's that that they want to bring Tom Baker back, and I think he's agreed. And we're just trying to figure out, what could be the story to do it. I mean, I know they want to have Elizabeth Sladen back as Sarah Jane. I mean, she unfortunately passed away, as you said a few minutes ago. But I mean, we have a lot of hope. But there's a lot more you can do. I mean, you have the different alien races, even Stephen Moffat's new creation, the Weeping Angels, which, as I thought, was like a real brilliant idea to do. And,
yeah, it was.
And talking about like watching it, like I didn't start watching the show. I think Sci-Fi Channel had it on for a little stint in I think 2008, 2009. I'm guessing, and that was during Martha's season, and I know it's one of those years. But I think I kind of came in toward the middle of that because I was told about this show, and I was like, okay, cool, I'll check it out. And then they had like a long marathon on, and that also included the episode when they brought the Earth back and Journey's End. And I was like, okay, this really got me hooked. So then that kind of got me to go back and start from the beginning.
Oh, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that they had it on Sci-Fi or any of that.
Because that's where I watched it. That's where it all ended, and they said, okay, the next season's gonna be a year from now. I was like, okay, but then that's when I discovered, it's gonna be on BBC America and not Sci-Fi.
Yeah. Yeah, because in like 2009, I don't even think they had a series for Doctor Who. And I think that was because David Tennant was working on Hamlet at the time. So,
okay, I didn't know that. Cause
yeah, he did a couple specials and everything. But besides the specials, he was working on something else, unfortunately. And I think that probably is what eventually led to him, not being able to do, the next season, probably, due to Doctor Who, and the success, he probably started to get a lot more work. I mean, he was already doing a lot, for Doctor Who, but he probably got even more after.
He did, and I remember, like, I saw an interview with him and when he talked about why he decided he wanted to move on, because he said it was getting good, he was enjoying everything he was doing, Doctor Who and all the plays he was doing, but when it came to Doctor Who, he didn't want to go in one day and start saying, the Daleks again, yay. I mean, he was enjoying it, but he wanted to leave enjoying it and not hating it.
Exactly.
And I respect him for that. I do. I mean,
yeah, you don't want to have something get stale.
Exactly, you don't.
What do you have any favorite episodes or anything?
I think now that I've been watching, well, since BBC America is doing the marathon today and tomorrow leading up to the beginning of season 7, I have to go back to, I probably would go back to the episode Blink in David Tennant's era. And I like that one because it was something new, and honestly, that was, to me, was like Doctor Who has touched on the line of horror a little bit.
Yeah, and back when with the old series, they actually had a lot of situations in which the enemy of the Doctor did scare kids, and it was actually becoming known, for having those kind of like jump scares and things like that. And even though it was a show that was initially intended for kids, but then it started to mature a little bit. And at one point, based on statistics on content and things that they had in episodes and things like that, at one point Doctor Who was the most violent television show on British television.
Really?
Yeah. Based on technical stats and things like that. They did like a survey of all of the different shows and things on British television, and at one point, Doctor Who was the most violent show on British television, during the original series run.
I'm guessing due to some of his classic aliens like the Cybermen and Daleks.
Yeah, and then they had different things sometimes like body parts, and then I remember reading that they had like a half a brain somewhere in something. They do that from time to time, and then even in the new series, they have like really disgusting looking enemies and things sometimes. So
yeah, I say like the characters in the Ood. Like I know that they are genuinely a peaceful race, but I think the first time that they showed the eyes glowing red, I think in the episode the Satan Pit, I was like, okay, yeah, this is kind of creepy, but I still liked it and watched it.
Yeah, and then their appearance is like a bald guy with his face exploded at the bottom.
Which one was that?
I said, and then the Ood's appearance, their appearance is like a bald guy with his face exploded at the bottom or something.
That's right.
So it looks really weird. Really weird.
Because the thing about they do, I mean, I know they kind of talking about it. Sometimes it's like, the Ood look like butlers, especially with them wearing the blue suits.
Yeah, they do.
And then they had like those nice gloves, and then the way they speak through the orb, is like, okay, this is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. After you get through the first few episodes where they introduce them.
True.
But it ends up actually being a pretty cool race of people. I actually like the Centaurans a lot when they first introduced.
Oh yes, the military race of the Centaurans.
Yeah, I've always thought that the Centaurans are pretty awesome. Especially the really nice ones.
Yes.
They're really nice, but they're really awkward because they are still brutal and militant. they'll say something like, thank you, sir. It's like, I hope that you die a wonderful death in battle or something.
Yes, I mean that kind of it sounds like a Klingon a little bit.
Yeah, and then I think the funniest of any of the alien races that they met up with so far for me has been the rhino, like the giant rhino.
The Jadoon, I think.
Is that the Jadoon?
Yeah, I believe I'm saying that right.
Those guys are really hilarious. Like every time they show up, they talk. They're like talking like gibberish, but they do it so like like direct, and they're so confident. What they're saying, and it sounds like they're going to kill you, no matter what they're saying.
Right, because you think about when they show up, I think the first time they showed up was when the hospital Martha was in was on the moon, and then everyone was like, "Oh, we're all scared," and then they had a translator said, "Okay, no, if you just do what they say, they won't harm you." But then some people still harmed them, and then they got killed, and then he's like, "Oh, like next," I'm like, okay. Because they're part of the Shadow Proclamation. It was like, and every time you kind of hear about that, it's like, Jadoon are gonna show up. Okay.
Yeah.
I think the most, and I have to go back to the episode Blink, because you think about the Weeping Angels. It's like, okay, they can move all around, but when you see them, they're frozen.
Yeah. And even when they show up in, like this season, they have a lot more abilities and things like that, which is pretty. They do some pretty crazy things in that 2-part fifth season episode that they had.
Oh yeah, yes.
That is when they really got pretty creepy. They ripped out the guy's like cerebral cortex and was talking to the doctor using his cerebral cortex.
Yeah,
talking to this guy.
The guy named Bob.
Yeah, reanimated his cortex so that he would talk to them.
And I thought when you realized that Bob was dead, I was like, oh, they killed Bob. Because especially like when you knew that they were doing that, and especially the part when Amy was looking at the screen, and every time that they cut back to the doctor was like, yeah, every time whatever holds the image of an angel is itself an angel, and I'm like, I love how they were going back and forth, Amy doctor, and then Amy's like, this thing is moving. and I guess because with them it's like you don't really know what else they can do.
Yeah, and in a sense they've kind of become like some of the more sinister enemies. Like I feel like they're right there with the Daleks as far as being sinister, really sinister, evil enemies, because these things don't speak, and they are, they're you can't kill these things,
Right.
You can't kill these things at all. So, with the Daleks, where they'll double cross you and things like that, you can still kill a Dalek. With a Weeping Angel, you have to either be looking at them, or you have to either do what they did and throw them into a time vortex.
And I think that
don't exist. And even with that, you have to wonder, okay, if they did that, it's like, well, they're showing up again in the 7th season, so it's like, wow, what's going to happen now?
Right, because think about when they fixed the time vortex, everything came out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Even I think when the way that the angels were tricked the first time is that you got them all to stare at each other.
Yeah.
So
but
it was
even
like,
with that, it doesn't seem like that should even be that effective, because you think about it, when the light cuts off in that room,
they'll move.
Yeah, they should be able to still move. So.
Yeah, but somehow, when they were trapped in that dungeon, it's like eventually the light has to go out.
Exactly.
But
so that's what I was thinking.
But for that moment, they're trapped.
Yeah.
Because
that was like the one thing I was thinking about, with that situation. I'm like, yeah, they're looking at each other right now, but when the light cuts off,
they're gone.
That's it.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's why I think like a lot of the aliens that they have in Doctor Who, it's like, okay, some of them, like, okay, let's see, well, the Cybermen, they're not aliens, they're actually human. because they're taking a human brain and putting it in a body to make them perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, with them, I think they are remotely sinister because of what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like get rid of your free will, become part of this, or become part of us. You can still live, but you're gonna live inside of a metal body. Especially that, I don't remember what episode it was, but it was in the parallel Earth, and the parallel Jackie, she was turned into a Cyberman.
Yeah.
Because it was like, oh, she's still here, but now she can kill you. Because essentially, I think what was interesting when they had the episode, the Daleks versus the Cybermen. I know that's not the title, but when that happened, it was like, technically, it is humans versus aliens.
Yeah, right. And I always thought that was really crazy too. With the Cybermen, and it's like, it can take you and turn you into a Cyberman.
Yeah, and they say it's
Cyberman, and then that's it. So it's like they actually use you. They actually harvest you. They're not like killing you. They're not like disintegrating you. They're actually going to turn you into, one of them. And make their army even bigger. So they're like a really big, threat. To the human race.
I mean, in one way of looking at it, they are similar to the Borg.
Yeah.
Similar, but I think with them, I mean, especially you had some Cybermen that did use their brains to say, I'm a human, but I'm in this metal body. Especially the woman in the parallel Earth who, I forgot the character name, but she turned against them and started fighting the Cybermen, and as she was doing it, she was crying oil. And I was like, yeah, that was really interesting. It's like the human spirit is strong.
Yeah, it is a very interesting way that they kind of showed, the human conscious kind of coming through, the Cyberman shell in a way, because at first, you're thinking, oh, they turn into these, android kind of things, and now, all humanity is kind of lost from them. But even, like, in the second Craig episode, he's like, they've closed the helmet on him, and then he hears his son crying, and he breaks completely out.
Right, and the Cybermen are like, what's going on?
Yeah, so that was really cool. That was really, really awesome to kind of see that, take place. Because it's like, okay, as long as, you don't wait too long, you can actually save someone from, becoming a Cyberman or staying a Cyberman.
That's true, but if you wait too long, they're just gone.
Yeah.
I mean,
considering, if they're ever going to say something like, if there's like some kind of time period in which, you have this amount of time before, it's all over.
That's true. I mean, and then if you think about another race, I mean, they're not aliens. I mean, like the Silurians, who the lizards that lived they were underground.
Yeah.
let's see, when the episode when they came back, it was like, okay, they're like, well, we were technically here first.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, they were. Because if people follow evolution, like the lizards grew into us. However people want to follow that or not, but they're like, yeah, well, the humans have to share with us. No, we gotta kill the humans. No, we should share. And it was like that whole interesting meeting when the doctor sat Amy down with them and said, okay, the first human Solarian meeting. And it was like, okay.
And I was, while we were talking about that, I was, trying to think of what, one of my favorite episodes was.
Yeah, I was about to ask you that. What was one of your favorite ones?
Yeah, and I was thinking, I was like, a lot of my, favorite episodes have come from the last two seasons. I love, David Tennant and Christopher Eccleston and stuff, but I've enjoyed Doctor Who more since Matt Smith became the Doctor.
Okay.
In the first few episodes when, he's meeting Amy, was just genius to me. And when he's like, they're getting to know each other, things like that. Like, the very first episode of the fifth season is probably one of my favorite. It's probably my favorite of all three first episodes with with the doctors. Probably my favorite of those three. I love, David Tennant's first episode. I thought that was pretty awesome. When he, finally wakes up from regeneration after, being asleep for most of the episode, and instantly his character kind of takes over and his personality shines through, the entire situation. And I remember him, the moment I said, okay, David Tennant's going to be pretty cool, was after he gets his hand cut off and then regenerates it. He's like, I'm in the first 15 hours of my regeneration, and, I can, and that means that I can do this. And he regenerates his hand, and he's like, the funny thing about this hand, it's a fighting hand. And then he starts, the guy and everything, and okay, David Tennant's going to be pretty cool. But for Matt Smith, it was almost like instantaneously from when he meets Amy for the first time as a little kid.
Right.
Like, instantly, they make him pretty likable. He's like, I'm so hungry. I really, really want bacon. And she goes and cooks bacon, and they're looking all happy. And she's like, yeah, I was able to make this guy happy. And he eats the bacon and is like, what the heck is that? And
yeah.
it's bacon. What do you mean? He was like, that is terrible. I don't want bacon. He was like, you know what I want? And, she goes and cooks like 2 or 3 other things, and he's just like, this is terrible. And then he finally goes to like fish and custard.
Yes, fish fingers and custard. I'm like, whoa.
And he's like, this is what I needed right here. This is what I wanted, and I thought that was awesome. And then, the whole aspect of him like, yeah, I'll be right back, and then comes back, and it's like years later. I thought that was excellent. And then, now she's an adult, and, they're thrust right into a mystery that they have to solve. And, you can see that, the world, her world has pretty much completely changed from her being younger when she was, like, really lonely and, in the house by herself and stuff like that. It's like now she has a boyfriend, and the people around town all know her. And, she's, doing the whole kissogram thing, going to parties and, kissing guys and stuff like that and dressing up. And you can tell that, not only has she always thought of the doctor, but now, being grown up, she's, like, kind of gotten attracted to him,
Yeah, especially when she
that was something that was pretty funny. Like Amy and Matt, Amy and the doctor's like kind of relationship. I felt like that was a really awesome relationship right from the start. you know. And one thing that I loved about this first episode of the 5th season was that I've always felt like the Doctor Who episodes and things were very storybookish, you know. And they each episode, you know, you could, if you wanted to, you could write like 130 or 140 page book, you know, off of like one episode.
Right, you could.
And, you know, you could have like a long-running book series off of, you know, all of the episodes of Doctor Who. And then this one, you know, it took that and it made it like almost like a modern-day kind of fairy tale, you know, because, you know, she was a little girl and this weird night, you know, she meets this, you know, amazing person, and she doesn't really believe what he's saying. She thinks he's crazy, but then, you know, he jumps in his box, you know, he's like, I'll be back in 5 minutes, and then he disappears. She goes and she packs all her clothes, and then she goes and she sits and she just waits for him to come back, and he never comes back. And 12 years later, out of nowhere, he shows up again, you know, and, you know, she doesn't remember him, but then she kind of does, you know, but, you know, because of her resentment for, you know, her feeling like he abandoned her, you know, she's kind of started to lash out and like kind of change her personality. But then once she realizes that, you know, he's like, I'm a time traveler, you know, I thought that I was coming back for you. You know, he's like, I always keep my promises. I'm coming back for you, and I meant that. You know, and then you see the little girl start to come out again. It's great, you know.
Right.
And I just felt like that whole first episode was put together so well, and you could tell exactly like the difference between the two lead writers. You know, and I think I like Stephen Moffat better than I like Russell T Davies' writing. I think I prefer his writing over Russell T Davies' writing. You know, which may be, you know, preposterous to a lot of Doctor Who fans, but, you know, I love the pacing and the direction of, you know, a lot of these newer episodes of Doctor Who.
Do you think like this new direction is taking on its own thing, but still staying true to where it came from?
Yeah, I felt like it's created a new identity for Doctor Who in a way, you know, because even the way that, you know, the companions have kind of interacted with Doctor Who, you know, and not only that, but now they are so important to the Doctor in these last 2 seasons. Like, you know, the Ponds, River Song, you know, they all come together and form this crazy storyline, you know, with the Doctor, you know, and, you know, with you know, of course, you know, the Doctor, you know, marrying River, and then, you know, the shock twist, you know, where River ends up actually being, you know, a regeneration of, you know, Melody Pod, you know, and, you know, that's all crazy, you know, and while, you know, some people, you know, may or may not have liked that, or, you know, you may have your own thoughts on that, but, you know, you got to remember, you know, what kind of show you're watching. You know, this is a show where, you know, he was fighting, you know, giant, you know, tarantulas, and, you know, his, you know, biggest enemies are, you know, in giant, you know, tanks, and then inside there's little squid people. So it's like, for it to kind of add this, you know, amount of depth to his interaction with humans, you know, it's pretty unheard of. And not only that, but it was very ambitious for them to do something like that. And I love the way it worked out, you know, because it took a small thing from, you know, one of David Tennant's seasons, you know what I mean?
Yes.
You know, which probably wasn't going to be that big, you know, before then, you know, and it was probably going to be something that just, you know, never came up again. But then, you know, they twisted that on its head and made it one of the most important aspects of the last 2 seasons, and they tied everything together, you know, because, you the kind. I feel like the overarching, you know, the overarching kind of message or like plot point of the last two seasons has been like destiny and not really being able to escape it, because these things are going to happen, regardless, just from the moment the Doctor eats Amy, everything is set into motion. The next two seasons have all been set into motion, leading up to the series finale of the sixth season, Everything has all been one long storyline, Amy, her meeting the Doctor, growing up, marrying Rory, having kids, the kid ending up being River Song. River Song ends up, River ends up, marrying the Doctor, and then, it turns out that, that was actually, not supposed to happen because, the Silent, actually, tried to train River into becoming, a person who was capable of killing, and so it's been really interesting to kind of see how everything started from, Amy Pond, and then even in the first couple episodes, the Doctor saying, you may just be one of the most important, people in the entire universe, and, you think about, okay, that's probably, true in some way, but it's probably not going to be, that big, but then it really is, she has, the daughter who grows up to be, this, like, super important person in the Doctor's life. And, and so it's like now, Amy and the Doctor, now have this, nigh unbreakable relationship now because, she's so important to, how his life has kind of gone. And so, yeah, that's been pretty interesting to kind of see that take place in that way.
And the one thing I remember, like one thing during David Tennant's Doctor reign, he said, the character said one thing of like, fixed points in time, you can't change them.
Mm-hmm.
Especially that episode when he was on Mars and it happened to be that day that the base was going to blow up. And he was like, I'm so sorry, I gotta leave. But even thinking about River Song, when he meets her, that's when she gets saved into the computer of the planet, the library planet.
Yeah.
And so we know eventually it's going to have to end up that way.
Exactly. And so I'm wondering, when is going to be the last time that we see River Song, because, she says, she always pops up, seeing the Doctor in different, with different faces and, seeing him, in different, aspects of his life, because they're always, linking up, just through different times. So I'm like, okay, when does her future become the Doctor's past,
Right, because, he gave her his sonic screwdriver, and I'm being a little technical because the one he got in the episode, the end of it was blue, and now the new one's green.
Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering how they're going to do that, or if they're going to do that, or if they're just going to forget about that part, and maybe just give her, anything, like any kind of sonic screwdriver, or maybe have like an old one or something, because, I'm wondering, okay, when is she going to leave the ship, or, what is going to happen with her, because I feel like in order for her to go on to die, there has to be like a moment, in the show where, she, something happens,
Right, because I remember when she met the doctor in the library, she's like, "Yeah, I came here because you told me to."
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, okay, so he told her to go, so he's gonna have he pretty much is gonna have to somewhat be near. I'm guessing. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if that's going to come up, at some point. Even, probably before Matt Smith regenerates into someone new. Since Matt Smith has said he's going to be there until at least 2013. So,
Right.
so he's probably going to have just as much time as David Tennant had. It's going to be pretty cool. And I'm hoping that each doctor will have, his good amount of time, to really, get people to really enjoy him and, love, grow to love his character.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like we said before, it was unfortunate that, Christopher Eccleston had to go after, just one season, because David Tennant especially, he went on to do it for, 5 years.
That's true.
After that. So it's like, I'm looking to see, okay, Matt Smith, he's probably going to do it for about 4 years or 5 years, and so, I wonder if, the next Doctor is going to be going for, still like 2018 or 2020 or something, if they continue to keep going with Doctor Who.
Right. I mean, and even if they don't, I mean, it'll be one of those shows that is going to be a great show just to watch, even if it doesn't go that long.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, think I want to pick up, the Doctor Who season eventually on like DVD and Blu-ray.
I do too. I mean, even I would love to go back and watch the earlier ones. I know some of them they don't have anymore. I don't think. And
yeah, they said that they actually lost a lot of the original footage of some select episodes. They've recovered a few, but one in particular is the first Doctor regeneration to the second Doctor. They actually don't have the official footage of that transformation anymore.
oh wow.
Yeah, and so they actually are looking for those and trying to find if any fans have them, because I believe that they, I think BBC was destroying, extra copies of, episodes and things for space purposes back in the, late 70s or
Yeah, they were.
like the early 1980s or something.
Because we have to remember. I mean, our generation has to remember we didn't have all the stuff we have now.
Yeah, we didn't have a lot of the, methods to save, footage and things like that we have now, because once, we film something, I mean, it can go digital and then we can throw it up on anything, I mean, look at like Smallville, it's on Xbox Live, PlayStation Network, it's on Amazon, it's on,
Netflix.
Everything. You can get individual episodes from, the entire series, and then with Doctor Who, unfortunately just being so, old, unfortunately it just hasn't been able to, have the same luck.
Right.
As some of these other shows.
It's unfortunate, but the good thing is you have episode synopsis, or however I'm saying that wrong, written down. I was able to find the very first episode online, like somebody had it on some website, and I was able to watch as much of it as I could. But even with that, it's like you have to search, but even if you can't find it, you can always read about what happened.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's one thing I did. I mean, I don't think I got through every story, but I went through enough to know, okay, these characters that we're seeing now, some of them are not new. They just brought them back, and then I'll go back and watch these episodes again. I'm like, oh, they did reference the first time he met that race or something.
Yep, and then you know, not only that, but you know, it's pretty interesting to just see, you know, what was taken from the, you know, universe that was built from the older ones. You know, they didn't go that far on, you know, the past of the Doctor and, you know, the missions that he's worked with and things like that. They didn't do those things. They didn't, you know, talk about all of that during, you know, the older seasons. You know, I mean, at some point the Time Lord showed up, and then it was introduced that the Doctor is a Time Lord, and then, you know, it took like years before they told you that, you know, the Time Lord lives on the planet Gallifrey.
Right, and I think was it the first time they showed Gallifrey? Was it when they had the End of Time special?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think that was the first time I remember seeing, you know, just at least in this series, I believe that was the first time I remember seeing.
Right, because I don't know if they, I think they did, and like Peter Davison. I know in one of the specials, recent specials they had about Doctor Who. I think they had one about the destinations of Doctor Who, and I believe he said something along the lines of, "It's like, yeah, I've been to Gallifrey before," because he was the fifth Doctor.
Yeah.
So I have to research, and I'm pretty sure somebody listening to this right now is screaming like, "Yeah, I already know." But this is one of those things like, okay, you know, with the emergence of new technology where we can make things CGI. I mean, I'm glad that we still build sets and props. You know, I don't want everything to be CGI, but the fact that you can see, okay, this is what was built about 30 years ago, and here's a new version. Looks the same, but it's a little bit cleaner, probably. And
yeah, definitely.
And you know, with this show, I'm just hoping that it does continue on for years. And I think about it that there's one essential element we have not talked about in this hour is the TARDIS.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, like, you know, the TARDIS has gone through so many changes. I mean, outside appearances pretty much stayed the same, but the inside has gone through so many changes with the different Doctors.
Yeah, it has. It's really been pretty cool to see, like, the different changes and things that the TARDIS has gone through. So, and I didn't notice until, you know, Matt this season that, you know, the TARDIS actually underwent, you know, specific changes itself.
I didn't either. I mean, it was kind of like...
But I guess, you know, if it's destroyed, I guess it has its own ability to regenerate as well in some way. Because, you know, that was one thing that was really cool about, you know, that, you know, first season opener is, you know, he had to wait because he couldn't use his TARDIS. His sonic screwdriver blew up, you know, and so he, you know, had to kind of improvise. And that was something that I feel was a nod to the older series because, you know, by the, I believe it was by like the 1970s, the sonic screwdriver wasn't used in the original series at all. By, I believe, the early to mid 1970s, they had completely gotten rid of the sonic screwdriver because they had introduced it, and then they didn't want it to be like a kind of plot device where, you know, anytime we're in a jam, it's calling the sonic screwdriver and it can do whatever. You know, so they downplayed it, and then eventually, I believe during the second Doctor tenure, they ended up having it destroyed. And then, no one used it at all during that. So, for it to be so important as it is now, is actually pretty interesting. As it wasn't that important in the old series. So, I feel like that first episode of the fifth season was kind of a nod to, the fact that, he used to have to solve things without the use of all of the gadgets and things that he had.
That's true.
So, that was pretty awesome.
I like that because it was kind of like, and I looked at it from a point of view also of, okay, this is the one we were used to. Now we're getting a new one. And it was like, okay, the TARDIS is rebuilt on the inside. I mean, the dimension of that room was rebuilt. The outside looked a little bit different. The new screwdriver. It was like also a way of saying, we know all this other stuff happened, and we're still going to talk about it, but we're going on a different road now.
Yeah, it's like now it's time to really let this Doctor stand on his own feet.
Right, because I know there was that one episode in season 6, I believe, where Amy and Rory are trapped in a TARDIS, and because it was taken over by a being from a planet, and they stumble upon the room that we went to for the 9th and 10th Doctors.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, so it's like, yeah, that room still exists. It's just somewhere in the halls of the TARDIS.
Yeah, exactly.
And because I remember, like, I've looked at some old images of like past control rooms of the TARDIS. Like, one was white. It didn't have that many controls in it, but it had a panel, like a few panels.
Yeah.
So and I like how they like even they said it has a swimming pool. It's like, okay. So and we have to remember, like, okay, this TARDIS is just it's a gateway to a dimension, but then it's connected to different dimensions.
Yeah, and this dimension is the Doctor's own. So, clothes are there and everything. So, it's been pretty cool, to kind of see the TARDIS go through its different changes and things like that. And then the TARDIS, being a very powerful entity within itself, as well, just, the things that the TARDIS has been able to do, especially in the newer series, it's been really interesting to see what they said that the TARDIS is able, like air bubble, allowing people to, like, float in space, and the, ability to, have, the TARDIS translate any language, was amazing. I don't know if that was in the older series or not, but I know that, I just thought that was so cool that the TARDIS was able to translate people's languages, things like that. You could talk to anyone, at any time, and know what they were saying. So, I've always thought that the TARDIS is like the coolest thing.
I did too. I mean, especially when they went on, Stephen Moffat went on the side saying this whole time the TARDIS is alive, and especially when it took on it got inside of a woman on Idris.
Yeah.
And then she was talking to him like, I've always wanted to tell you hello.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then when you realize she had to go back inside the actual TARDIS, it was like kind of sad.
It was, because now it's like I'm going back to just seeing the TARDIS, and not, an entity, not a person.
I mean, they always talked about the heart of the TARDIS, but we never really thought about it. Like, they would mention the heart of the TARDIS, okay. But then when you think about it more, it's like, yeah, when you say something has a heart, it's alive.
Exactly. And, and then not only that, but, just the way that the TARDIS reacts sometimes, allowing, sometimes it has taken the Doctor on, truths that it never meant to take, and that, you know, that he never meant to take, and things like that. You know, just acting on its own from time to time. You know, which has been pretty cool. You know,
Right, good. Because she told him, she said, "I took you where you need to be."
exactly. Where you were needed. You know, and which kind of furthers the fact that the Doctor doesn't really know what he's doing when he's wise about it.
Because I think especially when River comes into the TARDIS and then she parks it, and he's like, "Where's the sound?" She's like, you always been riding the brakes." He's like, "But I like the sound."
Yeah, she's like, you keep the brakes on. That's why it makes that sound. Yeah, and that was one thing that I always thought was really funny too. Was like I said in those early Matt Smith episodes, he really was like, you know, letting you see like, okay, you know, I'm the Doctor. This is, you know, me now. You know, and he had some really comedic moments in those first few episodes. You know, as the Doctor, he really had some amazing moments. Like conversation, you know, he's like, "Where's the sound?" She's like, "What sound?" You know, and he's like, you know, trying to imitate the TARDIS thing, and he's like, and he's looking at them like, "You don't know what I'm talking about?" Like,
I know. And I was sitting there laughing like, "What?"
and then probably my favorite moment with him and Rory was when he pops out of the cake at Rory's bachelor party.
Yes.
And he's like, "I need to talk to you about your fiance." He was like, "She tried to kiss me." And then everybody's looking at him like, "What?"
I know.
"You're a lucky man, though." He was like, she's a great kisser. And Rory's like, "Dude, like, what?" Like,
I know.
and then he looks at everybody, and he's like, you know, you say something in your head, and it sounds fine. And then the episode's done. And I was like, yeah, I love this guy, man. He's awesome.
Because I think with each actor, they have to bring a little of themselves to it to make you love that iteration of the Doctor even more.
Yeah, and one strength that Matt Smith has, you know, even in his short career so far, when he's the youngest Doctor, you know, I mean, he's 29 now. And so he's bringing kind of a youthfulness to the Doctor that, you know, we haven't seen before. You know, I mean, David Tennant, you know, I mean, even in his, you know, late 30s, you know, he was still a very energetic and youthful, you know, guy and everything. But you can definitely see that whole, like, kind of parental side kind of come out of him a lot more. You know, but with Matt Smith's personality, it's like, it looks like you're watching, like, someone who could be, like, our age, you know, controlling the artist.
Especially in, like, this little mini-series, Pawn Life, I think the first one, and he's like, I was dropping some beats, and I was like, okay, that was hilarious.
Some background vocals.
I mean, yeah, background vocals.
That on and everything like that. And I was like, that's probably something that David Tennant would have never done. As the Doctor, at least. You know, David Tennant himself probably would, but not David Tennant's Doctor.
Because I was thinking about something like, you know, catchphrases. I mean, I think David Tennant's one was Allon-Y, and then Matt Smith starts out with Geronimo, and then bow ties are cool, and then Stetsons are cool. And then all those memes, they took off from that.
Yeah, they have.
Because, I mean, I've seen a lot of t-shirts where it's like it has a picture of a bow, and it has a tie, and then it has an R, and it says cool. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I think, you know, I mean, regardless if people know where they've come from or not, they recognize that these memes exist.
Yeah, they do. And, you know, and like I was saying before, you know, the whole, you know, internet has been very friendly to Doctor Who. Very friendly. And, you know, it's pretty funny to see when, you know, the doctor mentions, like, social media and things in the show.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Like, what does he do? He's like, you know, we're going to, you know, this planet, you know, and it's so amazing. You know, we have all of these beautiful things, this great resort, you know, to come visit. And as soon as they get there, he pulls out a phone. And he's like, you know, I take you to, you know, a planet you've never been to. You know, it's like more amazing than anything you've ever seen. And it's like you want to make a Twitter post about it.
I know.
It's like you want to make a Twitter post about it. She's like, well, it's a camera too.
and that's the one thing I think that, you know, when a lot of people can say, you know, it is relevant.
Yeah.
To our time.
Yeah, and then with the doctor, you can tell. And the funny thing about his character is that he's so youthful, but he like tries to catch himself because he's like, well, you know, I'm old. I'm really old though, but you know, my personality is very youthful right now. He's like, but I'm trying to catch myself and I'm trying to act like you know, an adult, you know, and it's the way that Matt Smith portrays him is like, you know, he's this like really fun-loving, goofy person who from time to time tries to, you know, put on his big boy pants in a way.
Right.
And you know, like I'm you know, going to solve this like a professional. But then it never works out when he tries to do things like that.
Because I think the one thing that, you know, the one thing I think has been an overarching thing throughout the different doctors has always been he's lonely.
Yeah, and that's shown even more in the recent series, the recent two seasons of the series, which, you know, I believe that's why I started to like this one the most. You know, just the relationship that he's built with the current, you know, the current cast of companions and, you know, characters, you know, with them. You know, it seems like the friendship is even more solid now than it has been, you know, before. You know, a lot of people had a good long time to, you know, watch David Tennant go on his adventures with, you know, multiple companions and multiple people, you know, coming in from time to time. And with this doctor, they're kind of humanizing him in a way. Because, you know, this one, people don't really like bow to the doctor the way that, you know, everybody kind of fawned over him, you know, in the previous, you know, iteration. You know, with you know, the 10th Doctor, you know, everybody was like, oh, the Doctor, like, you know, you know, all the time, you know, but, you know, the way that Amy and Rory kind of approached the Doctor was a little bit different, you know, and even, you know, with River, you know, being his wife, you know, she knows everything about him, so, you know, she, you know, was approaching it more from, I love you, but, you know, I also know a lot about you, you know, probably more than you even recognize yourself, you know, and so they kind of bring him down a peg in a way, and it all feels very, very close-knit, you know, because of that. You know, the Doctor would, you know, he goes from being, you know, this legendary, you know, warrior hero, you know, in the 10th iteration. And then the 11th, you know, he's still all of those things, but, you know, the people that he's with now, they don't care about him. You know, they just know that, you know, this is a really cool guy, you know, who is extraordinary, you know, but, you know, he still needs us as much as we need him.
And I think another person, like before we met Amy and Rory, was Wilfred.
Was who now?
Wilfred, Donna's grandfather.
Yeah, yeah, and that was, I really liked the end of time because of, that whole aspect, with, him being kind of the companion in a way, during that, and then they got to really sit down and just talk to each other for a little while. And that was probably one of my favorite David Tennant moments, actually. Past, him with, the female companions and stuff like that. Past all of that. Really, that conversation with him and Donna's grandfather, when he's, the grandfather's trying to tell him, all of the stuff that he's been through, and the doctor opens up and he's like, I'm actually 905 years old, and I've been through this and that, and they're sitting there and they're almost like comparing notes, but you can tell that Donna's grandfather gains like utmost respect for him, being able to go through life the way he has, and always saving people, and then he took care of Donna, to the best of his ability, up until then, and everything, it was very touching.
It was, 'cause I think Wilfred started, because I mean he always made comments like do you have somebody? You need somebody, man. And
Yeah.
the doctor's like, no, I'm okay.
And him being, an old man himself, he understood the doctor. I feel like he understood the doctor even more so than anyone else could have. Because he's kind of, he lives in a house with his daughter and his granddaughter, who are both, wild in their own sense, and very quirky. And, he's mostly just, chilling out and, just watching them, do their, silly things that they do. And, you can tell, he's definitely run his course, and he's just kind of reflecting, in a way. And so, here comes the doctor, and actually asks him, asks for his help, and, he starts to understand, who the doctor is and how it relates to him so well. And that was really nice to kind of see that whole relationship between them. And that was one thing that really impressed me about 80 is, second episode, with the situation with, the new, England and everything, Starship UK, floating through space and everything, and then they find out about the star whale, and at first, the doctor resents Amy for, what she didn't even know about, really, and resents, the humans and all of them for, forcing him to kind of look at the situation of, like, I either have to kill this guy, kill you guys, or, make him a vegetable pretty much, or leave things the way that they are. And he was like, you're forcing me to do things that I don't want to do. That I've really just, I've sworn against these things and you're forcing me to do them, and I resent all of you for doing this. And yet, Amy, she's like, well, I understand. I understand that, what the star whale might be thinking. And so she just cuts off the laser thing, and she's like, you didn't have to torture this animal. The animal did it, because, he was lonely. It was the last of a race, who had lived for a very long, long time, alone. And so when the star whale came and picked up all of them and allowed them to build build their island pretty much on the Star Whale's back. It wasn't because, oh, you owe something to me, or I'm going to let you go. It was more, I wanted you to do this. I wanted you guys to do this because I was tired of going through space by myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was really impressed that Amy kind of picked up the doctor's lonely. That's it. It's like the doctor. He's lived so long. He's had so many people who have come and gone. And he never really gets to look forward to anything because he knows that all of the humans that he meets he's going to outlive. He's going to hop through these different times, and some family that he may have known is going to be long dead, by this point. And then in the case of Amy, she has a whole family, other than the doctor. But what she does, which is very admirable, is that she gets them to understand that even though I have this, even though this is my, even though I have my family, she was like, you're a part of it. You are such an important part of my life that I don't want you to ever feel alone if you don't have to. So she went as far as to have Rory come with her, and they both they're both the doctor's companion now, so that the doctor doesn't have to be alone. Because she knows how that feels, with living with her aunt, who was never home and stuff like that. And so it's like she knows how the doctor feels herself, just coming home and being by herself all the time, and the doctor, being in the TARDIS all the time, and with always knowing that something's going to happen and these people are going to leave. She decides that her family is going to be also including the doctor, which is pretty awesome.
Right, because I think we got one glimpse at that when Martha said she was done, and then she was about, and I think right before she left, she said okay, and then she walked out and came back, and he's like, oh, you changed your mind? He got all happy, and then she's like, no.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, and then you kind of saw a look in his face like, I'm lonely again.
Mm-hmm. And there's always that thing that they realize I can't do this forever. I can't travel and through time, even as amazing as this is, I can't do this forever. Eventually I have to go. I have to do this. And when it comes to Amy and Rory, the doctor leads them. He drops them off.
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to them saying, "No, I have to go. I have to do this." Amy's always happy to travel with the doctor.
But then, because then he was like, I want to make sure that you all are safe, because I think that happened after the hotel incident.
Yep, and that's really where he starts to realize, I'm lonely. I need, I love having friends and people to travel with, but they do have, a life other than me, and I don't want to be the person that ruins that,
Right.
Because they're consistently in tight situations, especially Amy and Rory, and then she really got a chance to see how that can, be ruined, when with that whole resort episode, with the, when Amy, is forced to hide, and then, they end up, time jumping like 30 years or something.
That other episode, because then they find her again. She's like later on, then she's resentful and everything.
Mm-hmm. She hates the doctor and everything. She built like her little like Sonic staff thing.
Oh yeah, that episode. Yeah, because it was Rory and the doctor trying to save her.
Mm-hmm. she didn't, and they had to kind of bring her back, and then even with that, he, still couldn't let that Amy come, and that was really hard for him, that was really hard, it's period, because it's like, he's saying, yeah, I could have, 2 Amy's and stuff, but he's lying to her, because it's like there's no way that she could come with him.
For one, with the whole paradox thing, that would be a problem, but that wouldn't have been right.
Yeah, so it's like that was pretty crazy, and I think that's probably where he starts to realize, one slip up, and that happened,
That's true.
Slip up and that happened, I pretty much ruined that Amy's life altogether.
Cause, if you look at it, like, they did get Amy back, but he did see a version of her where everything did just go wrong.
Mm-hmm. And so I feel like in the back of his head, he was like, yeah, like, I have the ability to do this to somebody.
Now, and what about what do you think about the part of realizing, okay, for a long time Amy was kidnapped, and we didn't catch that until they wanted you to know that.
Yeah, and I thought that was really shocking because I was like, wait, what? Where did that come from? And so I thought that twist was amazing. I thought that twist was amazing, and then the whole sequence of saving Amy was so hot. Like I just was like, wow, this is some quality television right here. Just them going and collecting, people to help with the, invasion, of the army and everything, base to save Amy. And then the doctor, his back and forth with, that general, and then the woman with the eye patch. I always forget her name, Madam something.
Yeah, I forgot her name too.
Yeah, it's just back and forth with them. I thought that was classic. I thought that was a classic Doctor Who episode.
Because who was the general? I forgot about the general.
The black guy who was, the general, and he's talking to the general, and he says, he completely belittles the guy. He's like, your name now is this. He's like, and you're going to be known for this. He's like, when people go past your house, it's like it's going to be, oh look, it's old man this. I can't remember if it was like run, or I can't remember what exactly he said to the guy. But I just remember watching him, have that conversation, with, that general, and just, like, wow, this.
I remember that now.
Exciting moment, for Matt Smith, as the doctor. And just also, showing his relationship with, Amy and everything, and then, even them twisting it further and showing you, okay, the baby, wasn't even there,
I know.
And that the baby was actually a flesh clone, too. So, that was heavy. That was all really heavy.
Because I think, especially the very next episode, when they met Hitler, then Amy and Roy were talking about when they were younger, and basically the baby was right there growing up with them.
And I thought that was kind of weird. Like, I was like, y'all really have to do that, I thought that was kind of like out there. And so I ran with it, but I was just like, that was kind of pushing it, as far as what you can believe. They never mentioned that ever, and I wish if they were going to do that they would have at least like flashback, like at some point, You know, because it's like, oh, we had this friend Mel all of this time, actually, yeah, you know. Yeah, we forgot to talk about that, but, you know, we had this friend Mel, and then, you know, we, you know, named our kid Melody, and so,
yeah. And I guess it's one of those things where it's like, you know, that happened, but I mean, we look at it from like a realistic standpoint, it's like you don't think about it. And that's why I took it and I was like, okay, and also true, that was technically your first female Time Lord, I think.
Yeah.
Because you see her, I think that it was at the end. I forgot what episode it ended with, but you saw a little girl walking down the street, and then she regenerated, and you didn't know what she regenerated into, and you kind of believe that probably was that she probably regenerated into their friend Mel, and then Mel regenerates into River Song.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like, okay, I mean, I guess not look at it from that point, you know, the whole Time Lord regeneration standpoint, because you don't know how someone's going to look when they come out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that was, you know, pretty interesting, you know, when she does regenerate into, you know, who we know as River Song. You know, she does the doctor thing, you know, going through and it's like, ooh, you know, I'm mature, you know, look at my body and all of this. And then, you know, she goes off and, you know, steals clothes and the part where she's like talking to the Nazis and just completely pisses them off.
Cause then, like, that's when you realize, like, okay, that's why she was locked up.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that's the one thing we didn't know until that point was like, why was she always in jail?
Yeah, and then, you know, I mean, you know, I enjoyed that episode. I really did. Because that was pretty funny to see, like, yeah, oh, this is River before, you know, she regenerated again.
And then, even looking at it from the doctor's standpoint on the episode, when he wanted to find guilt and the TARDIS showed him his former companions.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that was good because then they showed, like, yeah, he was guilty about Rose, Martha, and Donna, and then he really was guilty about little girl Amy. Man,
yeah, and, when it comes to like the doctor could actually you know, just pulled up that episode when he was talking about that episode of Good Man Goes to War when he saves Amy. You know, that one thing that I kind of like about the Doctor is how his emotions kind of come out from time to time. You know, because he tries to keep this demeanor, but then, you know, when it comes to like him getting angry, it's very, very like concentrated. To speak, you know.
yes.
And he lets, when he lets it out, it's like an explosion in a way, you know. And when it comes to Matt Smith, you know, he's had his moments where he has gotten angry, and it's just like, wow, you know, like I would have never expected that to come out of that guy, especially him being a relatively smaller person than the last two. You know, because even with David Tennant was a tall guy, you know, and then with Christopher Eccleston, he had a little bit more muscle, you know.
That's true.
And so, you know, Matt Smith is coming, and he's a short, skinny guy, you know, and you know, when he gets angry, it's like you just see kind of like the past, you know, Doctor kind of almost come out, it seems like, you know, or that kind of influence, you know, come out, and he just be like, snap, and then he comes back.
And I think his first moment was in his first episode, the 11th hour, when he calls the Atraxi back because you know, they're about to incinerate the Earth, and then they get Prisoner Zero, and then he's like, okay, then he's like, y'all come back here now, I got something to tell you. And then Then the Atraxes scan the Earth and the history, and then he steps through the image of all the doctors, and he's like, basically run. He's letting them know, like I may be playful, but don't come here again.
Yeah, and and like with the 11th Doctor, he's really kind of been that where it's like, yeah, he's a great guy, but when it comes to like, especially when he gets mad and things, it's almost as if you see almost like a villain almost kind of come out, like even looking at this episode, when he's like, because it was run away, is what he says, and he's like, the Centauran guy is like, Colonel Manson, he wants you to tell your forces to withdraw, and he's like, no, like, I want you to tell your people to run away, and he smiles, and it's like this really, it's like, I'm smiling, but I'm going to kill you kind of smile. And then the whole mood just starts to change, and he's like, I want those to be your famous last words. Run away. He's like, when children, laugh at you, I want them to call you, well, hey, look, it's old man, run away, and he's like, when someone asks you, if messing with people that I love, and he screams it out, and it's like, and he goes back and he's like, at any point, it's a good idea. I want you to tell them, run away. And he's like, oh look, I'm angry. That's new. And it's like this very like evil, like awkward, like face that kind of comes over him, which was very interesting to kind of see that. Because I remember reading somewhere that, in the older series, that they said that the Doctor, he wasn't particularly always the good guy. And that was really interesting to kind of see, that aspect, in Matt Smith and, these episodes and things. He plays a more, like, unstable, I guess, Doctor, and it feels like maybe things are getting to him in a way that is different from how things got to the previous iteration of the Doctor.
I mean, when you're talking about that, like my mind just goes back to the Pandorica, when all his villains came together for the reason to put him away.
Yeah.
Because they were like, we may be bad, but you kind of crossed the line more than we do.
Yeah, and then, even when, they talked about, like, who is the most dangerous, person in the universe, or the most dangerous thing in the universe, and then it's like, the Doctor, and then that's the twist, is that, he ends up being, who's closed inside of the Pandorica. And, that was pretty interesting, but it always plays out like that in a way. The Doctor always ends up being, this person who, someone sees as, a great miss in a way. So it leads you to wonder, what happened, and it leads you to wonder, like, in some of these side stories, what kind of stuff has the Doctor done? And when you see those things kind of come out from time to time, it just leads you to wonder, like, exactly what happened. Like, even in that one, once again, in The Good Man Goes to War, you remember they had the, that young female soldier who gave Amy the, piece of cloth or whatever from her people that, had the word that she knitted for her or whatever, that had the word melody on it.
Right.
And it was kind of like, it ended up being like River or whatever. and she's like, the word doctor, because she's talking to them, she's like, he's a great warrior and all of this, and they're like, he's not a warrior, he's not any of that. And I was like, well, why is his name the Doctor? And you're like, what? What does that mean? And then they explain it, and then like, in her, look at your influence, that you have on people. She was like, to her and her people, it's been passed down that the word doctor means warrior. And that's because of you.
That's
so,
right.
That was, really interesting to kind of see that. Because she had never, she's a person who had never seen the Doctor before. She had never, heard of him. I mean, she had heard of him, but never had seen him and saw what he was seeing,
That's true.
But yeah, so, I always thought that was pretty interesting how they had the, that one aspect of that story kind of come up, because I thought that was really interesting that, somebody was thinking of the word doctor and warrior, I thought that was crazy.
I do too. I mean, now that you remind me of that, I'm like, yeah, it does make sense. I mean, because that kind of goes to on that line of what exactly is a hero. I mean, it's all a point of view.
Exactly.
And I know that with some other stories of like DC Comics, Marvel Comics, sometimes that it's like, well, you say that you're a hero or something, but you might cross the line and that person reevaluates themselves, and it's like, well, in my point of view, you're not, or you are.
So you're not a hero.
Right. I mean, even like the beginning of like Pandorica opens, and the Doctor is standing in Stonehenge and he's talking to all the spaceships like you know who I am. What are you gonna do? And then they all run away.
Well, not only that, but even looking at the Daleks, a lot of the Daleks that the Doctor meets, especially since they've had to create new Daleks and things over time. A lot of them just have the resentment that the Doctor killed so many of them.
That's right.
He almost, made them extinct.
Yeah, remember that the one that was made out of the hand that he lost, and then that particular Doctor destroyed all the Daleks in Journey's End.
Yeah, and for them, for a lot of the Daleks, it's more about revenge than particularly, just making the Doctor's life hard or something. It's more about revenge. Like, we don't like you because of what you did to us.
Right. I mean, and that kind of goes to wonder, is like, are they really good? I think that's something that the writers have done really well over the years. Is craft these stories to make you think one way and then you realize it's something else. I mean, like, I'll go into a different universe here, like Star Wars, like like episodes 1, 2, and 3, or at least half of episode 3, we're with the Republic the whole way. The Separatists are bad, and then when the Emperor takes power and says, "Okay, I'm now naming the Republic the Empire," we're suddenly on the other side. If you look at it from that, if you look at it that way, I mean, the same thing can go for Doctor Who. It's like, yeah, to him the Daleks have always represented evil, but to them, he's been destroying their race. And he and his people were always at war with the Daleks.
And not only that, but they kind of hate each other for the same reason.
That's true.
The Doctor, he's like, you caused, the end of the time. And, I've caused the end of you.
But you're right. That is kind of how, if you look at it that way, that is what happened.
Yeah, and so it's like, when they kind of tell you, because even it takes a while to get that out of the doctor.
You're right. It does.
When they bring that plot point up, it takes a while to get that side of the story out of the doctor.
Because it's like, as soon as he sees a Dalek, he immediately wants to destroy it.
Yeah, and that's one thing that every Dalek,
Right. I mean, and I was thinking about something that you said a few minutes ago about this doctor, Matt Smith being the youngest. I'm like, wasn't the when you think about when he regenerated, he always got younger.
In a way.
I mean, beyond the age of an actor. But when you think about it, he's still aged and got older. But when he regenerates, his body gets younger and younger.
Yeah. In a way, it continues to get younger and younger.
But then he still is older in his approach, though.
Yeah, because and that's always been something that was pretty interesting to see. It's like, how is this one going to act? How is, what is his approach to, his companions and the, different people going to be like,
Right.
This one, this doctor that Matt Smith plays, he almost seems more doctor-like than Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant. Well,
with the future of the show, starting up tomorrow night with Asylum of the Daleks of season premiere of season 7. And we already know that the Pawns are on their way out, and he's going to have a new companion. What are you hoping to see?
With the Asylum of the Daleks, they said that they're trying to finally make the Daleks scary again. And so I was like, in order to do that, because they have been getting more and more sinister as they, progress this character, which has been nice, because if they are going to be, these great villains, of the Doctor's past, then, they're going to need to kind of show themselves as such a little bit more. So I'm really wondering what they mean, I'm wondering, okay, what does that mean? More, scary.
That's true.
Being the Dalek scary.
Yeah, that's true.
What does that entail?
Because I know that in this episode it's going to have like a version of every Dalek from the very beginning up to now.
Yeah, and that's going to be interesting.
The only way we're going to find out is if we watch it. But they've already announced the first 5 episodes, and we know the 5th one is going to be the Pawns exit. So it's like, I'm just curious to know what is going to be the direction following their exit, and especially with him as a character. It's like he'll be losing his friends one way or another. We won't find out until that episode airs. But we already know he'll be getting a new companion, and as far as we know right now, it's just the 2 of them. It could be a 3rd one day, and there's always the question about his wife. Where does she go?
Exactly, because that's the one thing. Even with knowing who these people are to the Doctor, just like everybody else, they have to go at some point.
Right. Some people like Martha go on their own accord. Unfortunately, Rose gets trapped in an alternate dimension. Donna, unfortunately, couldn't remember anything. Because if she did, she would die. Excuse me.
Exactly.
But
And, you know, when they interviewed Arthur Darvill and Karen Gillan about, you know, their characters of Rory and Amy, you know, how they're exiting, they could say nothing but, you know, how they never expected it to be what it was going to be.
And, you know, and with that kind of comment, it's like, it could be one of those moments that blows everybody's mind away. Like, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. Period.
Yeah, because you know, as I was telling you, you know, prior to the podcast, you know, the information I had seen on the internet, they had a screenshot of her facing a weeping angel, looking them dead in the eye. So,
and we can only imagine what that means, because it's like, if you think about the episode Blink, they're like, if they touch you, they transport you back in time.
And then even with her first experience with the weeping angel, you know, the effect that, you know, it had on her in that episode.
Because if you think about it, remember, it was turning her into one at first. Because one got into her eyes.
From the inside out.
So who knows? Maybe we can go. Maybe it'll go in that direction, or maybe it won't. Because I think about it, Stephen Moffat and his writers know that there are going to be people like us that are going to think that way. and if that's the case, he wants to throw us all for a loop.
And then also, I'm wondering, you know, if these happen to be the same angels from that 2-part episode in the season, if they harbor resentment towards me.
That's right. I mean, because I think the setting for that episode in Manhattan is going to be a real interesting one. I mean, because I know the second episode is Dinosaurs on the Spaceship. I know that's something fans were always asking for, about, like, how come we don't have dinosaurs on the spaceship, and then they name it Dinosaurs on the Spaceship. And I don't remember the other 2 episode names, but that make up the first 5. I don't remember those, but I know they're all going to be equally good, because I think Stephen Moffat said, like, you know, in previous seasons you've had these like cliffhangers, but in this new season, that every episode is going to be self-contained. You know, I do want to say, you know, thanks for being on with me on this one.
No problem.
Hey, I'm just hoping that we'll get more and more seasons after this one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to you know, seeing what's going to happen with you know, Amy and Rory's exit, and then also, you know, the new companion.
And what's something that you could say to people who are listening to this podcast now, like, who have never gone into it outside this conversation?
Doctor Who?
Yeah, Doctor Who as a whole. Like, I mean, what would you say to people who've never ventured into the TARDIS?
Well, one thing I can say about Doctor Who, that, you know, it wasn't something that I thought that I would be, you know, interested in at any point. You know, but I feel like with the progression of the series, especially with the new ones, it's gotten more and more contemporary, and it's actually, even with, you know, the crazy, you know, science fiction element, you know, there's always, in this series, probably much more so than the older series, but probably it's a lot more accessible to people now. So, you know, even if you have never watched something sci-fi before, you know, I mean, it a lot of times takes place in, you know, modern day, you know?
Right.
And, you know, that's where he meets most of these people, you know, is in modern day time. So, you know, it's pretty interesting, you know? I mean, it's has really good character development, and the actors are always, you know, spectacular in Doctor Who. So that's always something to look forward to as well. But I guess for people who have never watched it and are looking to just kind of find out about it, it's really, there's something, I feel like there's something in it for everyone, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There's something in Doctor Who for everyone. You know, if you've watched anything sci-fi at all, ever, there's something in there for everyone. You know, there's going to be things that, you know, make you laugh, things that make you mad, make you sad. You know, and I think this, more so than many, you know, sci-fi shows, really works towards, you know, kind of trying to bridge the gap between, you know, drama and sci-fi.
And I think this does an excellent job of doing so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been excited ever since I heard, you know, about season 7 coming out, and then when they announced the release date, I believe it was about a week or 2 weeks ago, it was like, okay, the countdown has begun.
Exactly. And a lot of people have been freaking out about, you know, what it's going to be like, going to happen in the season, and, you know, what surprises await. And just from, you know, the small parts it's shown, it seems like, you know, people are really going to be in for a treat.
I agree. Well, thank you again for joining me on this few hours of Doctor Who, and we'll get ready to watch the new season tomorrow, hopefully.
Oh, yeah, definitely, man.
Thanks again, Leonard.
All right, you too.
Thank you all for sticking through to the end of the season finale of the Let's Talk Weekly podcast for season 1. I do know that this episode was long, and I apologize for that, but we had a lot to say. Although it was long, I do want to say thanks for joining Leonard Flournoy and myself on this discussion on the lore of Doctor Who. For new fans, I hope that this was a great introduction to the series, and for old fans, I hope you could agree with some of the things that we said, and I hope you all stick around for season 2, which will be coming to you in a couple months or so. Before we wrap up, I want to say thank you to everyone who has supported the Let's Talk Weekly podcast, our website, and I want to say a very special thank you to everyone who has been a part of the show. We could not do this without your support. To my guests of season 1, Kai Smith, Amanda Williamson, Anine Wynn, and Leonard Flournoy, thank you all for being a part of the shows, and I hope to have you all on again in season 2. I just remembered that there were a few things that we did not say. Bow ties are cool, feathers are cool, and Stetsons are cool. Also, an important rule of the Doctor's: run. If he says run, you better run. In the words of the 9th, 10th, and 11th Doctors, this was fantastic. Allon-Y and Geronimo. As a side note, I must say that Doctor Who, the TARDIS, the sound effects, everything discussed in this podcast is owned by the BBC. This podcast was not done for profit. And we'll see you soon in season 2. Later.